Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're jumping into something pretty intricate. It sits right where, global affairs meet domestic U.S. politics.
That's right. We're talking about the Kilmar Abrego Garcia case and this whole evolving situation between the United States and El Salvador.
Yeah, and you, our listeners, sent over a great mix of sources: Politico, Newsweek, Mother Jones pieces, WLA analyses, even some Reddit threads, and official congressional stuff. So our mission today, to pull out the most important, maybe even surprising bits from all that. We want to give you a really clear picture, something that gets beyond just the headlines.
Exactly. We'll be looking at, well, the specifics of Mr. Abrego Garcia's own story, obviously.
Right.
But also the political and legal fight this has kicked off in the U.S.
And the human rights angle in El Salvador, particularly under President Bukele, that seems critical.
Definitely. And how the U.S.-El Salvador relationship itself is shifting. I mean, including this, honestly, almost unbelievable idea of U.S. citizens maybe ending up in Salvadoran prisons.
Wow. Okay. Let's start with Abrego Garcia himself. This wasn't just like a standard deportation case, was it?
No, not at all. So you have the Salvadoran migrant, Kilmar Abrego Garcia, lived legally in Maryland, 14 years, no criminal record.
14 years legally.
Right. And then, March 2025, he's deported. And the key thing, it was officially called an administrative error.
An error. And that's really sparked a firestorm, hasn't it? Especially dividing political lines in the U.S.
Oh, absolutely. You see Democrats framing it as a, quote, constitutional crisis, a denial of due process.
And they've taken action.
Yeah, people like Senator Van Hollen, Representatives Garcia, Frost, Ansari, Dexter. They've made trips down to El Salvador, issued strong statements.
Yeah.
Their main push is demanding the White House actually follow the Supreme Court's order, the one telling them to, quote, facilitate his return.
Facilitate. Okay. But the Republican view is quite different.
Totally different. They're framing this whole thing within the larger fight over illegal immigration.
Right. We saw that quote from Representative Pfluger saying Democrats are fighting on behalf of illegal criminals. Pretty strong language.
Very strong. And you also had House Republicans, Jason Smith leading them, visiting the CECOT prison, praising Trump's deportation work. It really taps into that base concern about border security.
So you have this legal clash. The Supreme Court says facilitate return, the Trump administration says.
They're essentially saying, we made a mistake, yes, but we're not actually obligated to arrange his flight back. They argue it's not their job.
Even though they caused the situation.
That's the contention. And Senator Grassley brought up El Salvador's sovereignty, suggesting their internal affairs are separate.
It creates a real standoff, legally speaking.
Oh, definitely. What does it mean for the rule of law if the executive can just ignore a Supreme Court order like that, especially after admitting fault?
And adding another layer here, Abrego Garcia was initially put in CECOT prison.
Yeah, and that place is specifically noted for its harsh conditions. It's not just any facility.
So someone is mistakenly sent there.
Precisely. And it connects right back to due process concerns. Remember, Representatives Frost and Dexter called the whole thing a government-funded kidnapping program.
Strong words again.
Very. I mean, deporting someone by mistake is one thing. Resisting bringing them back, especially from a place like CECOT, that raises huge ethical questions.
Okay, let's pivot then to El Salvador itself and these human rights issues. President Bukele's security model, it gets a lot of attention, both positive and negative.
It does. And central to that is the state of exception he declared back in March 2022.
Right.
The numbers arrested under it are just staggering. Over 85,000 people.
85,000.
Yeah. And when you have numbers like that, questions about due process just inevitably follow. We're hearing about mass trials, potentially up to 900 people tried at once.
Wow. I mean, the system must be completely overwhelmed. And the sources, they paint a pretty grim picture of the detention centers, like CECOT.
They really do. There was that letter from Representatives Meeks and Castro to Secretary Rubio. They talked about gross human rights violations, life-threatening conditions, very direct language.
And wasn't there a description in Mother Jones?
Yeah, Carlos Data called CECOT a black hole, said prisoners don't see sunlight, families can't visit. It sounds incredibly bleak.
And it's not just the prison conditions, is it? There were those U.S. Treasury sanctions, too.
Right, against top Bukele officials, Osiris Luna Meza and Carlos Amilcar Maricanchica.
Why were they sanctioned?
For allegedly being involved in secret negotiations, truces, with gangs.
So you put all that together. The U.S. mistakenly deports someone like Abrego Garcia into that system, overseen by officials facing those kinds of allegations.
And then initially resists bringing him back.
Yeah.
It raises very, very serious questions about who the U.S. is partnering with and what the real-world consequences are.
Which leads us nicely into this complex relationship between the Trump administration and Bukele. Sounds like they found some common ground, especially on migration.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Trump has praised Bukele quite openly for, helping to combat illegal migration.
But it went further than just cooperation, didn't it? There was that offer from Bukele.
Yeah, this is where it gets, frankly, pretty shocking. Bukele reportedly offered to take migrants deported from the U.S., regardless of their nationality.
Regardless, so not just Salvadorans.
Correct. Any nationality.
Yeah.
And even, apparently, offered to house American criminals in Salvadoran prisons. For a fee, of course.
House American criminals. That sounds incredible. And this idea of potentially deporting U.S. citizens to El Salvador.
That's the other really startling element. Trump has mentioned it publicly.
But legally, how is that even possible?
Well, that's the question, isn't it? House Majority Whip Tom Emmer, when asked about the legality, reportedly kept dodging the question.
What do legal experts say?
David Beer from the Cato Institute was quoted calling it obviously unconstitutional. There seems to be a huge gap between the political talk and basic constitutional principles about citizenship.
And there's a money angle, too. The U.S. paying El Salvador.
Right. Reports surfaced, apparently confirmed by El Salvador's Vice President Ulloa to Senator Van Hollen, that the U.S. was paying El Salvador to detain deportees.
Paying them. Okay. Do we know how much or what the justification was? It feels like a major policy shift.
The details are murky, which is exactly the problem. It points to a real lack of transparency.
Which Representatives Meeks and Castro were pushing back on, right? Demanding answers from Secretary Rubio about the deal, the money.
Exactly. They cited the Quesablaki Act, which requires Congress to be informed about these kinds of international agreements.
And they were worried U.S. money might be funding
human rights abuses.
Right.
That's the core concern.
Yeah.
Without transparency, how can anyone know if U.S. taxpayer money is supporting a system with such serious allegations against it?
It makes oversight impossible.
Pretty much. It creates this cloud of uncertainty around the whole policy.
So with all this swirling, the legal questions, the human rights concerns, the lack of clarity, the Democrats in Congress felt they had to respond directly.
Yeah, you definitely saw a concerted effort. Their motivations seem layered.
How so?
Well, first, obviously, advocating for Abrego Garcia, highlighting what they see as this constitutional crisis.
Makes sense.
But also, it seems, trying to get info on other detainees, maybe in similar situations, and pushing back against the Republican narrative on immigration.
And raising the human rights issues directly.
Absolutely. Expressing those concerns about Bukele's policies.
And the way they traveled was interesting, too. Republicans reportedly denied official travel funding.
Right, citing budgets. But these four House Democrats, Garcia, Frost, Ansari, Dexter, went anyway on their own dime.
Making a statement by doing that.
Definitely underscores how seriously they took it. And you had Senator Van Hollen visiting, too, actually meeting with Abrego Garcia himself.
Adds visibility. And didn't Representative Raskin connect this case to the idea of deporting U.S. citizens?
He did. Jamie Raskin drew that line, arguing these rights issues are interconnected. It's not just about Abrego Garcia, but potentially about the rights of Americans, too.
Okay, so, wrapping this deep dive up. It's clear the Abrego Garcia case has really peeled back the layers on some major tensions, both within the U.S. and in its dealings with El Salvador.
No doubt. You've got these sharp partisan splits in the U.S. You have clashing ideas about what the rule of law even means in practice. Then there are the undeniable, very serious human rights concerns in El Salvador.
And this U.S.-El Salvador relationship under Trump, that seemed very transactional, maybe ethically questionable.
You could certainly argue that. Plus, this big problem of secrecy around deportation deals and the money involved.
And the things this case brings up are honestly kind of mind-blowing. The idea that U.S. citizens could potentially be sent to a prison like CCOT.
Yeah, a place with documented abuses. And the executive branch appearing to defy a Supreme Court order.
It really forces you to think, doesn't it?
It does. It pushes us to ask some big questions, like, what does this case tell us about how we understand national sovereignty today? How do we balance national interest with, basic human rights?
Especially when domestic politics are so polarized.
Exactly. What happens to bedrock principles like the rule of law in that environment? There aren't easy answers here.
So maybe the final thought for you, the listener, is what are the longer-term ripples from this? For American values, for how the U.S. is seen on the world stage, it's definitely something to keep thinking about.